All righty, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We are going to get started. So welcome everybody to the March episode of To Catch a Fraudster. My name is Claudia Lee, and I'm the VP of Marketing at CertifID. And for everyone who tends to join To Catch a Fraudster regularly every month, you're used to seeing Tom Cronkite or Tyler Adams host, but I'm super excited to host today in honor of our special speakers, our guests today. We are joined by Michelle Green, who is the SVP of National Agency Operations at FNF, Liz Riley, who is the Chief Privacy Officer at FNF, and Elizabeth Weisong-Berg, who is the VP for Education and Training at FNF. We are going to have an amazing discussion. If the prep call was anything about like what we have in store for today. But first, let me just share how we're going to structure the discussion. So first, we want to just hear a little bit from each of the speakers, like what they do, how that relates to fraud, and what that means for everybody here today. So we're going to just share a little bit of background from each of the speakers. Then they will each talk about how they work together in fighting fraud as an organization for the agents on the phone today. And then we're going to pivot into just talking a little bit about the future, like what does each of their organizations have in store for helping and supporting the agents on the webinar today. And then last but not least, I alluded to this, but March is Women's History Month. And so we are extremely fortunate to have 3 strong expert female leaders from FNF here today. And I think that we can all learn from their journeys, right? Whether you are a female looking to grow your own career, or a male leader and ally looking to develop talent in your own organization. I think there are some really cool lessons and advice that the 3 women here today can share with all of us. Last but not least, we want this to be interactive. So put your questions, ideas, feedback in the Q&A so that we can, hear from you. So without further ado, I would love to hear from each of our speakers. And I would love to start with Michelle Green, because Michelle, I've heard about you for so long before I actually got a chance to meet you. So can you tell us a little bit about your role, how kind of your journey to that role, and how does that relate to fighting fraud at your organization?
Thanks, Claudia, and thanks to CertifID for having us today. And good morning, everyone. Well, I was rescued from the private practice of law and joining the title industry just over 25 years ago. And in that title journey, so to speak, I've kind of run the gamut from state counsel, state manager, claims, senior staff underwriting. But for the past decade or so, I've been focused in on the agency world, been on the business side. And my role really centers on making sure that I'm up to date on all the kind of things that are going wrong for folks, whether we're talking about underwriting risks, regulatory risks, wire and cyber type risks, basically seeing all of the things that happen to other people in a perhaps negative consequence kind of way, and then using all of the powers that we have at FNF through education, just, talking, supporting our agents to try to keep the bad things that have happened to other people from happening to everyone else, if you know what I mean. So that's about 10 years ago or so, we started talking about wire fraud in a really concentrated way in our industry. And so therefore, given what I just described as my role, I've sure been talking a lot about wire fraud and wire fraud avoidance for the past 10 years. It's actually shocking to me that this will be my 11th summer talking to agents about wire fraud. So yeah, that's how my role intersects with wire fraud. I mean, I try to keep all bad things from happening to our agents and our company and our customers. But heck, fraud and wire fraud is certainly a top topic here in March 2024.
That's amazing. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing that journey and 11 years of talking about wire fraud, and it never gets old, does it?
I wish it was old, and I wish it was the white noise that some people think it is, but it changes and evolves pretty much on the weekly. sad to say. So people who feel like, okay, I've heard about this enough. Can we stop talking about it? Sadly, the answer is no, because all of the folks on the panel today, as well as myself, we talk to folks on sometimes what is their worst day. And I really wish that folks have been paying more attention to how things are changing and evolving, and how this is really just, it's not ever going to go away. Although I know it's the goal of everyone here today on this panel and at Certified to, let's stop wire fraud. Let's figure out a way to eradicate it, at least from the title and settlement industry.
Yeah, agreed. I think we'll have more discussion for sure on how can we make it less, less of a thing over time. So Liz Riley, let's pivot to you, just because fraud issues tend to intersect with all things like data security and data governance issues. So Liz, again, so great to meet you, and thank you for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about your role, what your organization does, and just kind of your journey on, how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely, Claudia, and thanks to Certified for having us and including me with my esteemed colleagues on the call today. So similar to Michelle, I was rescued from private practice, I guess the phrase is, but probably like a lot of folks in the title industry, I have a background in real estate law. I began my career practicing in the areas of commercial real estate and real estate finance. And then in 2011, so I think I'm approaching my 13th anniversary with FNF, I came over to FNF as fraud counsel within the claims department. So my role then was to investigate and follow the fraud aspects of fraud related claims. At that point, as all of us on this call probably remember, it was mortgage fraud, mortgage stacking, fraud, forgery, identity theft, varying fraud claims. And my role as fraud counsel, there was so much of it that, we had the claims counsel who would administrate and facilitate the claims piece. And then I would build a case based on that fraud to report to law enforcement and then assist with investigation and ultimately, hopefully, prosecution. So came in a fraud related role. Fairly quickly after that, I joined FNF's corporate compliance department in 2012. I was regulatory and compliance counsel, and it's sort of in that context, FNF was seeing a need to enhance and grow its privacy compliance function. That was a risk that was increasing, and a risk area that was increasing from a regulatory standpoint. Regulation in that area was increasing, and so I raised my hand and volunteered to take that on. So knowing nothing about that area of law at the time, I didn't have a privacy background. It was a big learning curve, but I had a lot of fantastic help and some great resources available, and we kind of really built the centralized privacy compliance program that we have today. And it continues to grow. So, and really at about the same time, probably, Michelle, you mentioned it's going to be your 11th year speaking on wire fraud. We saw the emergence of wire fraud, business email compromise and wire fraud. It was initially, I think, starting to impact the industry. And so, it kind of goes hand in hand. If there's a potential business email compromise that leads to a version, there could also be a privacy incident. So because information was accessed in the context of that compromise that could give rise to data breach notification obligations or other privacy related concerns. And so, these risks just continue to emerge, continue to be involved in both the wire fraud side from, hey, what are our legal considerations or privacy compliance obligations in terms of the fraud, as well as managing just the day-to-day privacy program, which really is just making sure we have, the policies, procedures, management of data flows, including our data flows with third parties, to comply with our privacy compliance obligations and regulatory obligations. So for agents, probably the most kind of visible aspect of that function is the FNF privacy notice that gets printed out with every commitment and policy for the FNF family of companies, policies that are issued. And so, additionally with Elizabeth work on a good bit of training and resources for our agents that address privacy, as well as working on Alta's data privacy work group and making sure, both developing kind of the tools that our agents can utilize and data privacy best practices. But also advocacy, I think, is a big area, where we continue to advocate on things that, can counter fraud, as well as advocating on the data privacy legislation that can effectively, help rather than hinder our role in the industry.
Wow, that was such a helpful background, Liz. And I guess 2 comments to what you said. They were kind of aha moments for me, is that for both you and Michelle, your involvement in fighting fraud was just a combination of you saw the need and you kind of decided to really lean in and kind of take action. I think that's super cool. And then this is obvious, I'm sure, to so many, but it didn't occur to me till you were describing what you do and how that evolved, is just like the digitization of our industry has actually created way more need for what you do than, 10 years ago or whatever, right? So super interesting to me to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, the digitization, it changes the frauds, right? It evolves the fraud schemes and really can kind of make it harder for us in some ways, maybe easier in some, but harder in some ways to combat it. Yeah, that's a great point.
Absolutely, Claudia. I mean, I think that's what people ask, like, what was it about 2013, 2014 that sort of kicked off wire fraud? And I think it was, in fact, when the digitization of our industry became so commonplace. I can't wait to hear about Elizabeth's journey here too, because she dovetails into this as such a part of the overall practice at FNF. I want to jump to that, but that was such a great point. It's true. It's when everything about our industry became freely accessible online to anyone via the internet, when the bad guys could just surf the web without even hacking anybody and find out everything about real property and MLS and everything else. That's kind of what kicked it all off.
Agreed. Elizabeth, take it home. Tell us about your background and what you do.
All right. Well, apparently we're talking about being rescued today, because I was also rescued out of private practice to join my colleagues in the title world. But I did, and I'm gonna bring this back. I did 10 years of outside claims counsel for various companies, and I started doing that in title insurance underwriters. I started doing that in 2006. So, about 18 years now. And I did outside claims counsel for about 10 years. And to that point, I was doing a lot of old school fraud. So we literally I had a couple cases. One where someone held up a piece of paper. They didn't know how to use Photoshop. They held up a piece of paper to trace a signature, right? We also had early days of Photoshop fraud and doing all of that. So a lot of what I did and how I cut my teeth, unfortunately, in the industry was right along with Liz in looking at fraud and litigating fraud and getting back to what happened. I was actually preparing, I have a meeting today in Indiana, which is where I'm based, where I live. And I was going through some of the old fraud, because we're talking about, what happened in the past. And some of the cases, I was like, oh, I remember that now. So, that's what I did for 10 years. And then I did about 6 years of underwriting, and then it really came, I was hired at FNF to do national agency education and training. And with claims litigation, and when you're going to court, and underwriting, and then when we're also, educating on any of these topics, what is the fraud du jour? What really happened? What's so important is when we break it down, whether it's to a judge that is a general practitioner that doesn't handle title insurance every single day, doesn't handle real estate every single day, to new people entering our industry, how do we educate them about what we do? How do we educate them about the fraud scenarios that we are seeing? And how do we keep educating people every single day? So thank you for having me, because I learned so much from Certified. Also working with Liz and Michelle, we collaborate so often so that I stay up to date, so that I can transmit that information to our agents and really have everyone just be in tune with how it changes. But then also still remembering the fraud that we had in 06, 07, 08, because
Sure.
we still got old school fraud, unfortunately. We're always dealing with land and other people's money. And people like to steal for whatever reason, if only their powers would be for good all the time. So that's
Yeah.
how I'm here.
Old fraud hasn't gone anywhere, that's for
Not
sure.
going anywhere, unfortunately.
It must seem almost refreshing / easy when you see the old type, right? You're like, oh, that seemed so much easier.
Oh, look, one kid is trying to disinherit another kid. Seen that, done that.
Mhm.
And there's the reach of law enforcement is, it gets to people that are in the United States who do the old school fraud when it's interfamilial or somebody down the street or just the local bad guy or what have you. At least if there's a fraud at the end of the day, we can hope that the FBI or local law enforcement will actually give those people what they deserve, versus the overwhelmingly frustrating aspect of wire fraud in the modern world, which is that the bad guys don't get caught.
Well, so to take that thought, Michelle, and to pivot, I guess the small silver lining of all this is that all this activity keeps us sharp, keeps us learning, keeps us on our toes and innovating. And so I think just the backgrounds that the three of y'all shared is super interesting. And then just a little bit of additional insight into what you each do is really helpful too. So would love to just like kind of parlay that into talking about and giving everyone here in the audience, like just a little bit of an insider view on like how y'all work together. Like, could you share some examples of some recent projects or initiatives that you guys have worked on together when it comes to fraud or cybersecurity?
Absolutely. Well, first I have to say, and again, not to just give all the applause to my colleagues, but honestly, it is a team sport, and I couldn't be more proud than to work for the company I do, and with the folks who are on this panel. These are the people who go the extra all day, every day to protect our company, protect our customers, protect our agents. And as to all three of us, honestly, and certified as well, to protect our industry as a whole, for that, which is just a scourge on our industry. It's we're working together all day, every day, using our various roles and skills and talents to do all those things, to just make the title and settlement industry, feel like it used to. I mean, I feel like we all joined the industry quite a number of years ago, as did probably many of our listeners, when we all knew that we had to become experts in title stuff, and we are, and we are hardcore title folks. We know our easements and our covenants and our mortgages. And unfortunately, where we found ourselves here in March 2024 is that moving other people's money around and their private information has become the most important and highest risk thing that we do all day, every day. It's gotten to that kind of a scary place where moving money is the highest risk item we deal with versus dealing with mortgages and covenants and restrictions and all the other things that we consider ourselves experts at. I mean, I know that I didn't go to law school or join the title industry to become a professional wirer and figure out how to safely move money and personal information, for that matter. But that's where we're at. And in order to be able to keep our company, our customers, our agents, and our industry safe and safer than they were yesterday, it needs the skills and talents of everybody. It's an all hands on deck kind of a game. And given what you heard Liz and Elizabeth talk about as their background and their roles, all of those skills and talents are necessary. I mean, I found it interesting that all of us spent time in claims. All of us, whether it was Elizabeth on the outside counsel, handling claims. I did that as well. Liz did that from inside the company. We've seen how all of these things can go so wrong and how our agents, customers, and our industry are negatively impacted by this. And so it's going to take, we all work together to try to make that a better place. Sitting in the chair that I do, I see literally every single claim where it looks like an agent got tripped up or got, hit by a fraud or anything else. I see them. I don't handle them, but I see them. And gathering all of that information sort of on a holistic, drinking from a fire hose kind of a way, that's what drives the information that, then Elizabeth and I, collaborate and talk about how can we best go about training our agents and customers and realtor partners, et cetera, to be safer. And Liz with her, the privacy, she obviously talks about fraud on an industry-wide basis is certainly interior to FNF and our customers as well. But, the privacy aspect of it, of, all of the regulatory constructs that are popping up everywhere that can really negatively impact our agents or at least create a massive responsibility for them. I mean, that's kind of how I see us working together as we're not just a three-legged stool, the folks here on the panel, we're a big organization. But yeah, I mean, Elizabeth and I work together practically every day, right, Elizabeth?
Yeah, we do. And that's the thing is, Michelle is seeing them and then I'm figuring out, what to do with that. But then, recognizing patterns and seeing what is out there. Because with fraud, there's 10,000 ways someone can think about this. But, what is our pattern? What are things looking like? And Liz actually hinted at this and talked about all the work she does with the American Land Title Association. And I know Tom from CertifID has done so much, as has Tyler. We also, gather that information and talk. I am the chair at SLRAC, State Legislative Regulatory Action Committee, and we worked a lot on when we started to see seller impersonation fraud. And there's a pattern. Okay, let's get together. Let's share knowledge because it really is a team sport. Okay, what are you guys seeing up in Wisconsin? Okay, does that look like what Florida is seeing? Does that look like what Texas is seeing? And then gathering all that information so that, I'm really proud of the Alta handout that we put out on seller impersonation fraud, and here's some red flags. If you've got X, Y, and Z characteristics of the property, if you've got X, Y, and Z characteristics of the seller, do a little bit more digging, due diligence, really looking at that. But, gathering that information and as things change and communicating it and talking with agents and talking with everyone, including, the folks at CertifID, it's so important that we do that so we can combat fraud because it's the more moment for everyone, right? The more information I gather from Michelle, from Liz, from Krista Christensen, our company, the more I can disseminate, the more I can break it down, the more that we can work on this together. Yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, what about Warriors Against Wire Fraud? When we started seeing all of these, these frauds coalescing, at a certain point in time, and our agents, when we would talk to them on their worst day, on the day where they've had this negative impact or consequence, and they would say, well, I didn't realize that was true, or I didn't realize it had evolved in that way. And I also didn't realize that there are third-party vendors available in our industry to help even protect me. And worse, they didn't realize they weren't insured for accidentally failing to confirm wiring instructions. All of those things just really led us to a point where let's really focus on making sure that our agents are as up to date as they can be. And sometimes a national webinar like we're doing now is the answer. Sometimes a state by state initiative is the answer. And sometimes our agents need to be spoken to, one-on-one by the people they trust the most at a local level. And so let's get our sales representatives and our local management as expert as they possibly can be and speak to our agents in their offices, grab them by the face mask and say, listen, I don't want these things to happen to you. Let's talk through together, what you're doing to keep yourself safe. And, hopefully we have some tips and tricks and stories from other folks to help guide you in the right direction. That's one of the major ways and major project we had last year to really try to up the ante on protecting our agents and getting them as educated as they could possibly be on the latest and opposite of greatest in the fraud world. Yeah, and Liz is right along there with us for sure.
Those one-on-one conversations too can be very important. Right, webinars are great. Obviously, I believe in them. This is what I do. But having, enabling and providing the folks that are with our agents on a day-to-day basis, providing them with information and the training and some tools, to really help them have those conversations. And then if they need Michelle or I, to talk further, to do more education, to say, hey, what about this? We can't tell them exactly what to do because that's not our role, but providing information, providing things to look at procedures, absolutely. That's what I'm here for, is to help think and help provide industry information.
That's amazing. And I want to pivot to what the both of y'all are saying and extend it into what Liz does. So in that example, Liz, I mean, it can be any example that Michelle talked about. She sees every single claim comes across her desk. Let's say she reaches out to you, Liz. What are some of the issues that you get brought into and that the agents here today need to know about as they think through a, kind of a terrible incident like that?
Yeah, so like Michelle, I'm on an email pretty much any wire fraud attempt or diversion that happens that could involve our agent or one of our direct operations. I'm on the email thread that gets notice of those, and we all kind of wear our different hats as the stakeholders who are participating in this work group. And so typically the hat that I wear in those circumstances is kind of understanding, is it the data breach piece, right? If you have a compromise of an email, then an unauthorized party was gaining access to information that they shouldn't have had access to. And that's typically how these wire diversions start, right? It's with that threat actor getting enough information to insert themselves within the transaction to then redirect the wire. And so a lot of times it's that question of, okay, well, what are the legal obligations? What are the regulatory obligations? We've got a group of folks that have those relationships on the banking side to hopefully be able to work to freeze an account. But it's kind of helping our internal team and also too, when agents, report the diversion, hey, you may have to consider here whether you have a regulatory obligation to notify of a potential data breach, or if, there's now, we're subject to, is that insurance industry, we're regulated by GLBA. We've got privacy piece. You've also got the security part of GLBA, which is enforced by the state departments of insurance, and many states have a reporting obligation to the insurance regulator if there is a potential compromise. So, a lot of the work that I'm doing is helping with the investigation to rule out potential points of compromise, but also too, I think, just the education that Elizabeth and Michelle were talking about, which is so important. I mean, I think one of the most, the biggest education kind of thing that I think our agents are much more knowledgeable and aware of now, but for a while, it seems like, there was this idea that we hear that this is happening, but it's not going to happen to me. Why would it happen to me? I'm a small business in a small place and I just do local deals. Why would it happen to me? And I think one of, kind of the biggest education pieces was just on how indiscriminate these threat actors are. If there's an opportunity for them to, to make a buck by compromising a transaction, they don't care how big or small the business is. And so it's just those fundamentals, the cybersecurity basics, that I think has been a big, just from an education standpoint, a big piece of this. And a big part of the work that I do is just helping kind of bring that out.
Yeah,
Super helpful, Liz. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I couldn't agree more, Liz. And that goes with, we have to remember that change in the digitization and who can get to our records, who can get to our information. When we talk about this, it's not people necessarily here. They don't know the difference between Wabash, Indiana and Washington, Indiana. Two small towns in Indiana. They don't care. Do they have money? Do they have data? Reporters' offices, also auditor's office, anywhere that they can get to, that's what they care about. It's not old school fraud where we knew the person down the street who was doing the fraud and could go get them.
Yeah, agreed.
The bad guys are
and
sadly agnostic as to whether it's a commercial transaction, a residential transaction, a big town, a small town, a big deal, a smaller deal. It really doesn't matter. If there's money to steal and there's a way into the transaction through a breach, wherever that breach is, then they'll go for it. Because like, as Elizabeth said, all they're doing is doing scans of the land records that are online and freely available. They know where there's free and clear property. They know where there's equity to steal, and they'll just go steal it.
Yeah, great point, Michelle. And just to finish the thread with Liz too, because it connects to what you just said. Something happened. Liz brought up a bunch of great points on how she gets involved and why. So just to close that loop, Liz, if an incident like that happens, like what are the resources that the agents should be leveraging to go research those points that you made? Should they be reaching out to their FNF team, and the FNF team can bring in the right resources? Like what's the best path for them?
Generally, like there is potential, legal consequence, and then an agent needs to go and look at what that may be. I mean, kind of outside of our role as their underwriter to give them that legal advice, but we can certainly point them to the resources. But generally, each state is going to have regulations on, or a law on, what the notification obligation may be. And there's other guidance that's out there, tools that kind of track state by state what the requirements are. So we're always happy to share the guidance that's out there with the agents on here's what the law says in their state. But stopping short of advising them on what exactly they need to do, but give them think about.
Claudia, that's a great point though, because the sad part of fraud prevention and in working through these scenarios, either to hopefully stop them from happening, or if they do end up happening, have the best outcome at the end of the day, is a response plan. And to Liz's point, that response plan is often state specific as far as what the agent is required to do in a particular state. But there are tons of industry resources, and yes, FNF local folks, their representatives in the states have places where they can point agents to get the best framework for a rapid response plan. Because as nobody knows better than certified, that time is of the essence when there's been a negative outcome or a negative consequence in the wire fraud space. So there's got to be a written down step-by-step process of what folks need to do. And yes, we can be a resource for any agents on at least pointing them in the right direction to get there.
And building, and I think probably goes without saying, Michelle, but yeah, you want to build that response plan before you have an incident that you actually have to respond to. In practice, right? So you have your plan, and then make sure everybody who's a part of that plan know their roles and know what that role would look like in the event of a live incident.
That's amazing, Liz. And Michelle, let me just ask you one more follow-up question to what you just said. I think maybe you answered my question already, but because of just the landscape of everything you see, I know you must have, tips and tricks or things that people should be doing that they don't know about. Like, what do you think is one of the most underutilized resources when it comes to fraud prevention that people need to know about here today?
Fraud prevention or rapid response? Fraud prevention?
It's a broad, like like anything that's
Sure.
underutilized that you wish everybody would know about or go do.
At the end of the day, it really gets down to the simplistic thought process that we're dealing with other people's money all the time. and that we can never be cavalier about moving that money. There was a time in our industry when wiring was, far safer than it was now. And I'm not saying the wire system is obviously still safe. It's the way our transactions flow and the way people obtained the wiring instructions to move money was never really a top of mind issue for many people who've been in our industry for a very long time. And if I could just get people to go back to the time when, if they could just treat this as their own money every single time, and know several things. This is somebody else's money. If this situation goes badly, I'm going to be liable for it. And number 3, I don't have insurance for this if I mess it up. If we had those 3 items at the top of everyone's mind, this is other people's money. Somebody could very easily try to steal it. If it goes wrong, it's on me, and I don't have insurance for this. I think everybody would double down on all of the prevention that they need. I think many people, if not most in our industry, are certainly aware that there are resources out there that are preventative or certainly assist in prevention, as far as whether it be a third-party vendor or practices and protocols in their office. It's just getting them to actually take this seriously enough, and it will filter right back to the comments we just made, is don't ever have this idea that this is not going to happen to me. Whistling past the graveyard for the last 11 years is, hope is not a strategy. It never has been, and it never will be. Hope is not a strategy. So yeah, and as far as on the backside, when a bad thing has happened, what I wish everyone knew is that please don't take the first days, weeks trying to fix this on your own. Get the support and help you need. Follow your rapid response plan. Call companies such as a Certified, or perhaps there are others that are involved in funds recovery that can stop things quickly. Call a lawyer. Even if you are a lawyer, don't think about representing yourself here. You're too emotionally involved. My point is I get people, I hear from people all the time who say, they don't call us and let us know until, well, this thing happened several weeks ago, and I called my bank, and I called the other bank, and I've been calling that other bank, the receiving bank, every day for 3 weeks, and they're not getting back to me or telling me anything. At that point, almost every avenue you have to have a lesser bad outcome at the end of the day has passed you by. Let experts help you. Whatever money you're out, it's going to be penny wise and pound foolish to not expend a little more money to try to get the best outcome for yourself and your clients. So, and those are simple things. Don't think it can't happen to you. And if we could get everybody on that page, we would have fewer problems. And then when there's a problem, don't try to fix it yourself. Engage people who are it's their job all day, every day, to try to make the best situation out of this really bad happening. And I think that we would all be better off if we could figure out get all those folks on that same page.
Well,
That's way more comprehensive and holistic than any one act or thing. Thank you so much. And what you described up front of just everyone understanding it's your responsibility, you could be liable, you may not be covered. That resonated with me because I'm a huge believer in just focus. Like what I heard from you is just like focus the organization around that. And when humans are focused on a goal, they can accomplish, so much with just that focus and everybody being aligned. So
I have spoken to thousands and thousands of agents about wire fraud. And even to the last time I did several days ago, it never fails that somebody will come up to me afterwards and say, I know that you just set up there that there's no coverage, whether it's E&O or some specific coverage available for when somebody in my office accidentally fails to properly confirm wiring instructions, but I have it. I know most people don't, but I do. No, you don't. I'm wrong about a lot of things in life. I'm not wrong about that. There are people out there, a very, very, very substantial population of people, perhaps even listening today, who believe that they have a piece of insurance that's going to cover them if somebody in their office accidentally fails to properly confirm wiring instructions. And I promise you, you don't. That right there, if that wouldn't get your attention to focus, I don't know what would. We're not used to, in our worlds, in the title and settlement space, operating without a safety net for our business. If we miss a $500,000 mortgage in the land records, theoretically speaking, not giving legal advice here, but theoretically speaking, you'd think your E&O might cover you. But if you find that mortgage and accidentally wire it away to a bad place because you didn't properly confirm wiring instructions, you do not have coverage for this. Somebody just asked, the E&O doesn't cover an error with wiring? Absolutely not. No. Nor does your cyber coverage, nor does your crime coverage, nor does your, social engineering coverage. None of those, as we're sitting here in March 2020, I review these policies all day, every day. There is no one who is in the business of covering in the title and settlement space, accidentally failing to confirm wiring instructions for, say, a mortgage payoff or a seller's wire, which is those are the overwhelming scourges on our industry right now.
And I think it's important to take the next step then too, right? If we don't have coverage, who else probably doesn't have coverage for these situations that we deal with every single day, right? So when we have the conversation, when we do our own, as an agent, we do our own rapid response plan. Are you having conversations with your realtor partners about what they are doing? What is their plan going to be? That's some of the things that I've been doing. I was at a realtor event on Monday. Last week, I was in South Carolina talking with recorders at PRIA. What is in your industry? What is your response plan? Because that dovetails into our response plan, right? If our partner in the transaction is the first person that gets the call, right? We want them to know what they need to do to stop it. And having that conversation, that's an important conversation that we can all take. Spring is here. We're looking at, getting more listings. We're looking at having more deals. Fantastic. Are we talking with our industry partners about what they're going to do on their worst day? Because that can affect our worst day. Because again, we know this, 24 to 72 hours, we get everyone on board and have those conversations. Same thing for what Liz does, the data breach. If they have that, what are they going to do? And just asking those questions, because we're doing a very great job about this. It's not just title people, it's not just escrow community. It's everyone in the transaction, and then looking beyond, right? How do we get that information out? How do we talk about this with everyone? Because, most people at some point, even if it's, are going to have some sort of real estate transaction. How do we get that out there? How do we talk about the reality of the situation that every single person is living in?
That's amazing, Elizabeth. And I'm gonna attempt to bring a sports analogy into what you just said. It's kind of like when you're watching a baseball game and before the batter goes up, they review videos of like their past at bats with this pitcher, so they can kind of like visualize what they would happen, what they would do in different scenarios. What you just described is just getting everybody on the same page across the transaction and just like play out mentally, if this were to happen, this is what you do, and just everybody having a game plan. That's excellent advice. And maybe you might have answered my last question before we get to the next topic, but just like I asked Liz and Michelle in different ways, but on your front, is there like one thing or like a resource on the educational front that you wish everybody here knew about, that you feel like is underutilized or people just aren't aware?
There's a couple of different things. We have some internal best practice portfolio builder that's very good, but that's based on Alta best practices, and some resources there. The Alta rapid response plan and just detailing what happened, and it's just, look at it, develop it, work on it for your company, right? Train on it. And that's what I always talk about on anything. Written procedure, absolutely do it, but then you got to train on it. After you train on it, what are you doing to make sure your team is still doing what you asked them to do? That's an audit. And, no one, I get it. No one likes to have their work reviewed, but it's so important because that's how we learn best. That's how we know if our teams, need a little bit more training in an area. And it's a self audit, right? Like, what am I doing? Am I doing X? Is my team doing X? After we do that, actually talking about the results with the individuals, talking about it as a team. And then guess what we're going to have to do? And I know Liz Riley knows this. We're going to have to look at those procedures on a schedule. When are we going to look at that again and again and again? When are we going to train on the changes again and again and again? And then how are the audits? How are we going to respond? Because we know it's wire fraud especially has evolved so much. And it's going to depend on the type of deals that we are doing. It has changed with the market. So we have to update procedures. We have to train on it. And, use the certified webinars, use Alta resources, come to our FNF family of company trainings, And with education, it's so important to realize too, my goal every single time I'm doing a presentation, even to people, that are in the industry for a long time, I've heard this over and over. My goal is to have one or two really great nuggets come from my presentation that they may not have known before. If I have a newbie, it's going to be, whoa, if I can get one or two nuggets every single time into someone's brain that they can take back to their office, I've succeeded that day. That's how I base that. Like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Like you just had that baseball analogy. I think about, fraud prevention as a team sport. So we're getting ready for March Madness here. I'm from Indiana. I played basketball. Right? If the point guard loses their guy, that forward better come forward and help out. Or from the weak side, arms up, we're going to block it. Trace Jackson had a great play the other day. You got to do the things, right? Like that's how this works. That's how it operates. But again, for me, if I get one nugget out to people, I've done my job for the day, and I'll get another nugget, coming up for everyone to look at and learn about and train on.
You just
Elizabeth
gave me a
is so
nugget
right.
that you just I was
She's
just saying,
so
you just
right. I
outdid
mean,
my
these
sports analogy.
practices and protocols that folks are using to avoid wire fraud and other frauds, but certainly wire fraud practices and protocols are great. But guess what? A protocol is only as strong as your weakest employee on their worst day. The last 3 wire frauds that I have seen our valued agents fall victim to were situations where if I, the 3 of us industry experts on this topic looked at their protocol, we would have said that's a pretty solid protocol. But when I talked to the agent on that day, I said, what happened? And they were like, I don't know. We had this great protocol. I have no idea why that person didn't do what they were supposed to do. So a protocol is great, but unless, as Elizabeth said, you audit to it, you train to it, make it virtually physically impossible to get around in your office. Again, a protocol is only as strong as your weakest employee on their worst day. And that weakest employee might be you as the business owner, if it's your role to audit to these things or to be the final word on whether a wire gets sent. And then to Elizabeth's other point about if we're talking rapid response and we have a protocol and are we training to it and how, or did we just super copy or print out the PDF from the ALTA website, one of which will say, perhaps contact an attorney immediately to try to maybe get a TRO against the receiving bank from distributing the money back out to the bad guy. It might say I'm just giving for example, on your rapid response, engage an attorney and do this. That's a great idea. We advise with little a, we tell our agents that might be a good idea for them to do on their worst day. But if you haven't already thought about who is the attorney in your area that I would call, who is an expert in this, and maybe I've even had some preliminary conversations with them saying, would you be a great person to call if this bad thing were to happen to me? I would love to have your support in this. Then you're going to be in that stress moment trying to make decisions again, which is something just absolutely have to avoid. You've got to have your bad day protocol, like it's second nature.
This is so relevant because just to extend the sports analogy one more time, it's kind of like you're reminding us all that like you can have a game plan, but you have to practice the game plan. really like practice it so it's like in your muscle memory in case the game actually happen. It's like a weird sports analogy, but you don't know when the game is going to be, but you don't want to lose the game, so you better be practice so it's like second nature, like Michelle said. So
What if
just,
one of your teammates is hurt that day and not in the game?
yeah.
Yeah, who's going to take over that role? Yeah, we could go sports all day with that.
Next woman up, who's up?
This is amazing. And I do, and just mindfulness of time. I think maybe we hit on the second point a little bit, but I really do want to get to the third chapter of what we want to discuss. Like, are there any new initiatives or just like developments that you guys see coming that you wanted to just share with the audience, like resources to expect or just anything that's coming that you wanted to alert people to?
I'll start. Certainly in I think the biggest evolution that I see coming is in this seller impersonation space. When we started talking about seller impersonation and guiding and educating our agents about it, we kind of used to be able to say that if anybody had ever heard this person's voice or seen them in a call like we're doing right now, or it's certainly if a real live seller had ever come into a realtor's office and signed a listing agreement, then there's almost, that's probably a safe transaction, because almost all, like virtually every single seller impersonation fraud that we saw at that time, 6-8 months ago, they were situations where the bad guy was only communicating by text and wouldn't answer a phone call, but then would just text you back when you try to call them. They certainly would have never appeared on a Zoom or a FaceTime or done a Ron or anything like that. And we also used to always be able to say 6 or 8 months ago, there's never a seller's mortgage and there's never a buyer's mortgage. Well, the bad guys continue to evolve. We started this conversation about how this isn't going anywhere and it continues to evolve. So we have to maintain our focus. As we sit here today, if I had those 5 characteristics of that, pretty much every seller impersonation fraud we saw at that time were true. And if any one of them wasn't, you were probably safe to go ahead and close. I've already now, still most of them have all of those characteristics. But we're starting to see the bad guys branch. I have seen a seller impersonation fraud that an agent fell victim to where there absolutely was a buyer's mortgage. It was hard money mortgage. I have seen the bad guys pay off a seller's mortgage. So no longer just solely free and clear stuff anymore. But most importantly, and to your point of evolution, we're starting to see on a rapidly accelerating pace, the fake sellers communicating with us in a way that we would think couldn't happen if I was a bad guy from an organized criminal organization in Russia or something. He could pretend to be Elizabeth Berg from Indiana. He can at least a reasonable facsimile of a female person from Indiana that might fool a closing person. And it's really a bad guy in Russia, but with AI, deep fake, Chat GPT. I know some people hear those words and they think, oh, here we go again, something that's never going to happen to me because I live in Indiana. This is no longer just Minority Report. I saw it at the movies. This is real live stuff. The bad guys are doing this. They can pretend to be somebody that they are not in a way that is very fooling to you. And I don't mean by text or by email. I mean by Zoom. I mean by a telephone call. Again, you see this on the news. People can pretend to be your own child because they've captured 20 seconds of them speaking from their Instagram account, and they would be able to fool you that you're speaking with your child on the telephone. That's how good this is getting. This is how scary it is. So what am I seeing close in the near term horizon in this space? I'm seeing that seller impersonation fraud is going to continue to blossom in ways that it certainly didn't look like at all 6 or 8 months ago. It used to be, if anybody had seen or spoken to this person, it almost certainly was not a seller impersonation fraud. That is not true anymore. So we really need to stay up to date anytime we're dealing with this, vacant or non-owner occupied land. But frankly, I think that will continue to change too. Anytime they can still steal a seller's wire, they're going to steal a seller's wire. Frankly, that's how wire fraud started, 10 years ago, 11 years ago. We're right back where we started.
Great reminder. Yeah, just when you think you have your hands around it, it's evolving again. So thank you for that, Michelle. Liz and Elizabeth, any advice or just, share things that are coming?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michelle, hit the nail on the head with the ability of the fraudsters. I mean, we've talked about in our industry how we can leverage AI, for business, for good, but at the same time appreciate that the fraudsters are going to be leveraging that tool for bad. And so, it's seller impersonation fraud, it's business email compromise, the level of social engineering they can now do using AI is incredible. And so we have to be very thoughtful about that piece of this. We evolve our protocols, our defenses. The threat actors are going to evolve their tactics too. And it's kind of interesting, just kind of from where I sit from a privacy standpoint, a lot of the privacy protections that sort of regulators have sought to put in place can actually they can make fraud prevention harder because in the digitization, I mean, we talked about this at the beginning, the digitization of our transactions can actually make that fraud prevention harder. And so, one of the ways we can work to combat frauds is by being more, intrusive, I guess, for lack of a better word, from a privacy standpoint. There are tools out there to validate identities of transaction participants, make sure it's a live body, that sort of thing. But we have to balance that, right, with the privacy interests of the legitimate transaction participants. So, that's certainly an area that I think is going to cause evolution, both for us as an industry and for the fraudsters.
That's a great point. Yeah, there's this push-pull privacy versus data to fight fraud. Yeah, that's a huge insight that I don't think many of us have thought about, Liz. Thank you for sharing that. Elizabeth, I keep waiting for you to, as the last speaker on a topic, but bring us home. Is there anything else that's coming that you want everyone to know about?
Just to kind of dovetail into where I think this is at and what we need to do and just bringing it home. With any of this, whether it's, data privacy, something happened, whether it is seller impersonation fraud, whether it is a buyer who had a wire diverted, doing our plans, but then also if we have that feeling in our gut, and this is what I talk with closers all the time, if you have that feeling something's going wrong, you gotta investigate it, you gotta stop. And we've got to talk with our partners in the industry. Who are the lenders you work with most of the time? Who are the realtors that you work with all the time? And having that conversation and allowing each other to have what I like to call the pause. I'm going to have a pause here because something's really feeling off for me and I got to talk it out with you. Like picking up the telephone, talking it through and asking those questions. Because yeah, to Liz's point, it might be a little intrusive what I'm going to ask you. How did you establish that relationship with the seller? Normally we don't ask that question, but we might need to ask that now. But having that preview conversation with your industry partners to say, hey, there might be a time that I need to pause. I have a gut feeling. I want you to give me the ability to do that, and vice versa. If they are having a feeling about, maybe the buyer or something, that's where I think the human element, we can combat the 70% where we mess up our procedures with also using our human element to communicate with each other by the telephone in a conversation to really talk the fraud through, talk the transaction through, and making sure that everyone is as safe as possible and feeling like they want to proceed forward and close the deal.
I agree more. That's excellent advice. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, I'm just staying mindful of time. We really only have 1 minute left. So rather than having a more evolved discussion about career development, could I just ask each of you to share like maybe one piece of advice, your lesson learned along your journey of, as a female leader? It can be to the females here today. It can be to the male leaders developing their organizations. Could you help us with one closing thought before we sign off today?
Well, I can certainly say that if you are anybody who's interested in the title and settlement space, or interested in being with a major underwriter or something like this, our discussion today about combating fraud is it is absolutely a growth opportunity, because what we figured out pretty quickly about 10 years ago, and we've learned more even here today, is this isn't going anywhere. So if anybody who's at the genesis of their career and they're looking to think of something that they want to get into as far as a career focus, again, it's if you had to put your kid in college and say, what do you want to major in, or what do you want to focus on, and you don't want it to be an industry that's no longer going to be relevant in 5 years, I wish I could say that wire fraud prevention wasn't going to be relevant in 5 years. I just know that I'd be wrong if I did. I would love to go back to making title fun again and having this not be our overwhelming topic of conversation at every industry event. But I would say that anybody who's wants, like I said, an attorney, anybody who's part of the title and settlement industry, somebody who's in the tech field, such as somebody who could work for CertifID, people who understand how to can think of and invent a new way to prevent this, or make without what we're doing even better and more bulletproof. That's a great career to get into.
Yeah, it's a call to action for everyone. We need your talent. So thank you, Michelle. Any parting thoughts, Liz and Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, I as you said, and we talked about, this is a team sport. Fraud fighting is a team sport, and go back to our sports analogy. Everybody on the team, they have their specific strengths, right? And so I think just knowing our strengths, leveraging each other's strengths, is big in combating these kinds of frauds. And as women, we can be really good at kind of seeing the strength in others, but not necessarily appreciating our own. And so I think that would be my parting words, is just, if we kind of work together, leveraging each other's strengths, and most importantly, recognizing our own, we can get this done.
I love that. Thank you.
Yep. And then just reaching behind us, right? At some point, who's coming up the ladder? Whether we're at a place now that I feel like some things that the women in my mom's generation overcame for us, and who's behind us, no matter who it is, that we can bring along, that has the information that we need, that is potentially an expert. I grew up with the internet, but it was dial-up. It has changed. Who's behind me that they know something more, and I can't be afraid that they might know more than me. That's okay. How can I help them advance their career? How can we all work together?
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. Yeah, y'all have covered all the bases. See what I did there? Thank you so much. There were some questions in the Q&A that we will definitely respond back to you if you shared a question. And I just know we're over. So just thank you so much, Michelle, Liz, and Elizabeth, for a great discussion and for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.